Maya Rodriguez stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, the red lettering blurring through tears she refused to let fall. The cramped studio apartment in East Portland felt more like a prison cell than a home, with its peeling wallpaper and the persistent drip from the bathroom faucet that she couldn't afford to fix. 3 months behind on rent, living on ramen noodles and whatever free samples she could gather from the grocery store, she had hit rock bottom in ways she never imagined possible just 2 years ago. Before you hear how this all unfolded, I'm curious where you're watching from today. Drop a comment and let me know your city or state, because what happened to Maya could happen to anyone, anywhere, when people underestimate what others are truly capable of. The sound of expensive tires crunching over broken asphalt drew her attention to the parking lot below. Through her grimy window, she watched a gleaming black Tesla Model S pull into the visitor spot, its chrome wheels catching the afternoon sunlight like mirrors. Derek stepped out first, his 6-foot frame draped in a custom-tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent for 3 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, and his Italian leather shoes clicked against the pavement with the confidence of a man who had never worried about money in his life. The passenger door opened, and out stepped Vanessa, Derek's new girlfriend who looked like she had walked straight out of a luxury fashion magazine. Her platinum blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her red designer dress hugged every curve of her gym-sculpted body. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she linked her arm possessively through Derek's, her crimson lips curved in a smug smile that Maya recognized all too well. Maya's stomach churned as she watched them approach the building. Derek carried himself with that same arrogant swagger that had once made her heart race when they first met in college, but now it made her feel sick. He moved like a predator who knew his prey was cornered, and today, that prey was her. The knock on her door came exactly at 2 o'clock, punctual as always. Derek never did anything without calculating every detail, and this court-ordered meeting to discuss spousal support was no exception. Maya opened the door with trembling hands, immediately feeling underdressed in her faded jeans and thrift store sweater compared to the designer power couple standing before her. "Derek, this is quite the place you've set up here," Derek said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy as his eyes swept over her tiny living space. He stepped inside without invitation, Vanessa following close behind, her nose wrinkling slightly, as if she could smell poverty in the air. "Really making something of yourself, I see." Maya closed the door and gestured toward the small folding table that served as both her dining room and office space. They could sit on the mismatched chairs she had picked up from a yard sale, though she doubted Vanessa would want to risk staining her $1,000 dress. Vanessa perched carefully on the edge of one chair, pulling out her phone to snap what Maya assumed would become a social media story about slumming it in the poor part of town. Derek settled into his chair with the ease of a man about to deliver a business presentation, which in many ways, this was. "Let's get straight to the point, Maya," Derek began, pulling out a manila folder thick with legal documents. His voice carried that familiar tone of condescending patience he used to employ when explaining basic concepts to his startup employees. "I know you've been struggling since our divorce was finalized, and frankly, I feel bad about it. Despite everything that happened between us, I'm not a heartless man." He slid a single sheet of paper across the small table toward her, the sound of it scraping against the wood seeming unnaturally loud in the cramped space. "This is my offer for monthly spousal support. I think you'll find it more than generous given your, well, circumstances." Maya picked up the paper with hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor. The number at the bottom made her breath catch in her throat. $200 a month. $200 to cover rent, utilities, food, transportation, and every other expense that came with simply existing in the world. Derek watched her reaction with the satisfied expression of a cat playing with a wounded mouse. "Now, I know what you're thinking," he continued, his voice taking on that fake reasonable tone that had always preceded his most cutting remarks. "200 might seem low, but let's be realistic about your situation here. You never held a real job during our marriage. You never contributed anything meaningful to our household income. You spent your days playing around on that computer of yours, pretending to understand technology while I built an actual business from the ground up." Vanessa snickered softly, covering her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers. "Baby, you're being too nice," she whispered loud enough for Maya to hear every word. She was basically a professional housewife who couldn't even keep the house clean properly. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she remained silent. Her eyes drifted to the corner of the room where her old laptop sat on a makeshift desk, its black surface worn smooth from years of constant use. She clutched the support offer more tightly, the paper crinkling under her grip. Derek leaned back in his chair, warming to his subject like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. "The truth is, Maya, you're 32 years old with no marketable skills, no work experience, and frankly, no prospects. This $200 a month is more than you could earn flipping burgers, which might be the only job you're qualified for at this point. You should be grateful I'm offering anything at all, considering how you left things between us." He gestured around the shabby apartment with a sweep of his hand, his wedding ring glinting in the dim light. "Look at this place. Look at how you're living. You can barely afford rent on a studio apartment in the worst part of town. You're shopping at thrift stores and eating gas station food. This is reality, Maya. This is what happens when someone with no real skills tries to make it on their own in the real world." Vanessa had stopped pretending to be subtle with her phone, now openly recording what she clearly thought would make an entertaining story for her followers. Derek shot her an approving look before turning his attention back to Maya. "I've moved on. Obviously," Derek continued, reaching over to take Vanessa's free hand in his. "Found someone who understands what partnership actually means. Someone who brings value to a relationship instead of just taking up space and resources. Vanessa has her own business, her own income, her own ambitions. She doesn't need to be carried through life like dead weight." The words hit Maya like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. She had heard variations of this speech during their marriage, usually during fights about money or her refusal to get what Derek called a real job. But sitting here in her falling-apart apartment, facing eviction and genuinely unsure where her next meal would come from, the cruelty felt sharper than ever before. Derek pulled out an expensive pen, the kind that cost more than Maya spent on groceries in a month, and set it down next to the support agreement. "All you have to do is sign," he said, his voice now taking on a business-like efficiency. "Accept the $200 a month, and we can put this whole unfortunate chapter behind us. Refuse, and you get nothing. Your choice, but I'd recommend taking the deal. It's not like you have any other options." Maya stared down at the paper, her vision blurring slightly around the edges. $200. Less than what Derek probably spent on a single dinner with Vanessa. Less than his car payment. Less than what he used to tip at expensive restaurants when he wanted to impress clients. She looked up at Derek and Vanessa, both watching her with expressions of barely concealed amusement. They were enjoying this, she realized. This wasn't just about money or legal obligations. This was Derek's final victory lap, his chance to prove once and for all that he had been right about her worthlessness. Maya's fingers moved instinctively to her laptop, running over its familiar surface like a talisman. Hidden beneath that worn black plastic lay secrets that would change everything, numbers that would make Derek's arrogant smirk disappear forever. But for now, she simply nodded and reached for the pen. "I need some time to think about it," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. Derek's smile faltered slightly, as if he had expected immediate capitulation. "Time to think about what exactly? This is the best offer you're going to get, Maya. Don't let pride make you do something stupid." But Maya was already standing, moving toward the door with a grace that seemed to surprise even herself. "I said I need time to think about it. I'll have my lawyer contact yours with my decision." Derek and Vanessa exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this small act of defiance from someone they had written off as completely defeated. Derek stood as well, straightening his suit jacket with sharp, irritated movements. "You don't have a lawyer, Maya," he said, his voice taking on an edge of impatience. "You can barely afford rent. Stop pretending you have options when we both know this is the only deal on the table." Maya opened the door, holding it wide in a clear invitation for them to leave. As Derek and Vanessa filed past her, she caught a whiff of his cologne, the same expensive scent that used to make her feel safe and loved. Now it just smelled like arrogance and broken promises. "Don't take too long deciding. Derek called over his shoulder as they walked toward the Tesla. "The offer won't be on the table forever, and frankly, your situation isn't exactly improving with time." Maya closed the door behind them and leaned against it, listening to the sound of the expensive car driving away. Only then did she allow herself to smile, just slightly, as she turned back toward her laptop. Derek had no idea what was coming, and that ignorance would cost him everything. The Multnomah County Courthouse felt like a cathedral of judgment, its imposing marble columns and high ceilings designed to make ordinary people feel small and powerless. Maya sat on the uncomfortable wooden bench outside Courtroom 14, clutching a manila folder that contained what little documentation she had managed to gather for her divorce proceedings. Her thrift store blazer, purchased for $12 and still bearing a faint smell of someone else's perfume, felt woefully inadequate in this temple of expensive suits and polished leather briefcases. Across the hallway, Derek held court like a celebrity at a red carpet event. His legal team consisted of 3 attorneys from Morrison, Blake & Associates, the most prestigious family law firm in Portland, their combined hourly rates probably exceeding Maya's annual income. The lead attorney, Richard Morrison himself, was a silver-haired man in his 60s who wore his reputation like armor. His navy suit was cut so precisely it looked like it had been painted onto his lean frame, and when he spoke, other lawyers in the hallway stopped their conversations to listen. Derek stood at the center of this legal constellation, his confidence radiating outward like heat from a furnace. He had changed into an even more expensive suit than the one he wore to Maya's apartment. This one a deep charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his smile carried the easy assurance of a man who had never lost anything he truly wanted to keep. Flanking Derek were his character witnesses, a carefully selected group of successful friends and business associates who would paint him as the long-suffering husband of a lazy, ungrateful wife. There was Marcus Chun, Derek's business partner, whose venture capital firm had helped launch Derek's tech startup. Jennifer Walsh, a marketing executive whose luxury handbag collection probably exceeded the GDP of small countries. And David Thornton, Derek's college roommate who now ran a successful consulting firm and owed his initial client base to Derek's connections. Maya's legal representation consisted of one exhausted-looking woman in a wrinkled pantsuit who carried her files in a canvas messenger bag with a broken zipper. Sarah Hendricks was a public defender who handled family law cases when the court system absolutely required it, usually juggling 15 active cases at any given time. She had exactly 47 minutes to review Maya's situation before they went before Judge Patterson, and those 47 minutes included 2 phone calls from other desperate clients and a hurried consultation with a colleague about an unrelated custody battle. "You need to understand that your situation is challenging," Sarah said during their brief hallway conference, her voice carrying the weary tone of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "Your ex-husband has significant financial resources and an excellent legal team. You have no documented income, no significant assets, and frankly, very little leverage in these proceedings." Maya nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. She had spent the previous night lying awake in her studio apartment, staring at the water stain on her ceiling and trying to figure out how to explain 7 years of her life to a judge who would see only unemployment and dependence. The courtroom doors opened with a heavy thud, and the bailiff called for the Rodriguez versus Rodriguez divorce proceedings. Maya followed Sarah into a room that felt designed to intimidate, with its dark wood paneling, an imposing judicial bench that towered above everyone else like a throne. Judge Patricia Patterson was known as a no-nonsense jurist who had little patience for sob stories or emotional appeals. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her reading glasses perched on her nose gave her the appearance of a stern librarian who had seen every excuse in the book. Derek and his legal team took their places at the plaintiff's table with the smooth coordination of a professional sports team. Their materials were organized in color-coded folders, their exhibits numbered and indexed with military precision. Maya and Sarah sat at the defendant's table with their single manila folder and a legal pad covered in Sarah's hasty handwriting. "Your Honor," Richard Morrison began, his voice carrying the rich resonance of someone trained in classical rhetoric, We appear before you today to resolve what should be a straightforward matter of spousal support in a divorce case. My client, Derek Rodriguez, has been more than generous in his attempts to provide for his ex-wife despite her complete lack of contribution to their marriage or their household finances. Morrison moved with practiced elegance as he addressed the court, his gestures calculated for maximum effect. Mrs. Rodriguez, he continued, has spent the last 7 years of marriage unemployed by choice, refusing multiple opportunities for employment or education that my client offered to provide. She has no marketable skills, no professional experience, and has made no effort to become self-sufficient despite my client's repeated encouragement and financial support. The attorney pulled out a thick binder filled with documentation that made Maya's single folder look pathetic by comparison. We have here 7 years of financial records showing that Mrs. Rodriguez contributed exactly $0 to the household income. $0, Your Honor. Meanwhile, my client built a successful technology company from the ground up, working 16-hour days while supporting a wife who spent her time engaged in what she generously called research, but which amounted to little more than recreational internet browsing. Maya felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as Morrison painted her as a lazy parasite who had drained Derek's resources while contributing nothing of value. The words stung because they contained just enough truth to be believable while omitting everything that actually mattered. Judge Patterson looked up from the financial documents Morrison had submitted. Mrs. Rodriguez, she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. What was the nature of this research that kept you occupied during your marriage? Maya stood on shaking legs, acutely aware that every eye in the courtroom was focused on her inadequate appearance and obvious nervousness. I was studying emerging technologies, Your Honor, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Specifically cryptocurrency markets and blockchain implementations. I was tracking market patterns and developing investment strategies based on technical analysis and fundamental research into various digital asset platforms. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Patterson's expression didn't change, but Maya caught the slight exchange of glances between Derek and his attorney. Morrison's smile grew wider, like a shark sensing blood in the water. Your Honor, Morrison said, his tone now carrying a note of amused condescension. This is exactly the kind of fantasy that my client has been dealing with for years. Mrs. Rodriguez has convinced herself that browsing cryptocurrency websites and reading online forums constitutes serious financial research. She has no formal education in finance, no certifications, no professional background in investment management, and certainly no actual results to show for her alleged expertise. Derek stood to address the court, his posture straight and confident. Your Honor, if I may, he said, his voice carrying the reasonable tone of a man reluctantly forced to expose uncomfortable truths about someone he once loved. My ex-wife became obsessed with these digital currencies around 2018, spending hours every day reading conspiracy theories and get-rich-quick schemes on internet message boards. I tried to be supportive, but it became clear that this was just an elaborate way of avoiding real work or real responsibilities. He pulled out his phone and showed the judge what appeared to be screenshots of Maya's computer screen. These are examples of what Maya called research, he continued. Hours spent on Reddit forums discussing something called meme coins and day trading strategies that lost money consistently. She would show me charts and graphs that she claimed proved she understood market movements, but every prediction she made turned out to be wrong. Every investment recommendation she suggested would have cost us money if I had been foolish enough to follow her advice. The character witnesses took turns reinforcing Derek's narrative with surgical precision. Marcus Chin testified about Derek's brilliant business acumen and work ethic, painting a picture of a visionary entrepreneur held back by a spouse who didn't understand the demands of building a successful company. Jennifer Walsh spoke about Maya's social awkwardness at business functions and her tendency to monopolize conversations with incomprehensible technical jargon about computers and cryptocurrencies that made other guests uncomfortable. David Thornton delivered what felt like the killing blow. Your Honor, he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone sharing a painful truth. I've known Derek since college, and I watched his marriage deteriorate because of Maya's unrealistic expectations and refusal to contribute meaningfully to their partnership. She would spend entire social gatherings talking about her cryptocurrency theories, while Derek worked to maintain relationships that were crucial to his business success. She seemed to believe that reading about technology online made her some kind of expert, but she never demonstrated any actual knowledge or achieved any real results. Maya sat in stunned silence as witness after witness painted her as a delusional woman living in a fantasy world of imaginary expertise and non-existent accomplishments. Their words were carefully chosen to sound reasonable and concerned rather than cruel, but the cumulative effect was devastating. When Sarah Hendricks stood to cross-examine the witnesses, her questions felt half-hearted and ineffective. She hadn't had time to prepare a real defense strategy, and it showed in every hesitant inquiry and poorly structured challenge to their testimony. "Your Honor," Sarah finally said, returning to her seat with visible defeat, "my client may not have traditional employment history, but she deserves basic spousal support to help her transition to independence. 7 years of marriage entitles her to some consideration as she rebuilds her life." Judge Patterson reviewed the financial documents one more time, her expression unreadable behind those stern reading glasses. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said, looking directly at Maya, "do you have any documentation to support your claims about cryptocurrency research or any evidence of actual financial expertise?" Maya felt the weight of the entire courtroom pressing down on her as she stood to respond. "Your Honor," she said, her voice growing steadier as she spoke, "I do have extensive documentation of my research and analysis. Portfolio tracking spreadsheets, technical analysis reports, market timing predictions, and detailed investment logs going back to 2018. I've been tracking the performance of various digital assets and have developed systematic approaches to portfolio management based on fundamental and technical analysis methodologies." Morrison immediately objected. "Your Honor, Mrs. Rodriguez could have created any number of fictional documents on her computer to support her claims. Without third-party verification or actual investment results, these alleged documents prove nothing except her willingness to maintain an elaborate fantasy." Derek leaned over to whisper something to Morrison, who nodded and stood again. "Your Honor," he said, his voice taking on a tone of patient explanation, "my client is prepared to make what we believe is an extremely generous offer despite Mrs. Rodriguez's complete lack of contribution to their marriage. He is willing to provide $200 per month in spousal support, which frankly exceeds what someone with no job skills or employment history could reasonably expect to earn in entry-level employment." The attorney pulled out a final document, this one thick with legal language and official seals. "Additionally, my client requests that Mrs. Rodriguez formally renounce any potential claim to ownership interest in Rodriguez Technologies, the company he built through his own efforts and expertise. Given her complete lack of involvement in the business and her demonstrated ignorance of actual technology and finance, this should be merely a formality, but my client prefers to have all potential complications resolved cleanly." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized the full scope of what Derek was attempting to accomplish. Not only did he want to pay her poverty wages, but he wanted her to sign away any legal claim to the company that her research and insights had actually helped him create, even though he would never admit that truth in open court. Judge Patterson studied both parties with the calculating gaze of someone who had presided over hundreds of similar cases. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said, her tone carrying a note of practical sympathy, "the court recognizes that divorce is difficult and that rebuilding a life after marriage requires time and resources. However, the evidence presented suggests that you will need to develop marketable skills and employment history to achieve genuine independence." The judge's gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. "The court will take this matter under advisement and issue a written ruling within 30 days. In the meantime, Mr. Rodriguez will provide temporary support of $150 per month pending final determination." As the courtroom emptied, Maya remained seated while Derek and his victorious legal team celebrated their obvious win with handshakes and satisfied smiles. Morrison patted Derek on the shoulder like a coach congratulating a star player, while the character witnesses gathered around to offer their congratulations on what everyone assumed would be a complete victory. Derek approached Maya's table as she slowly gathered her meager files. "You know, Maya," he said, his voice carrying what might have been genuine concern if she hadn't known him so well. "This doesn't have to be personal. Sign the company documentation, accept the support offer, and we can both move on with our lives. You can find a nice job somewhere, maybe take some computer classes at the community college, and build something real for yourself." Maya looked up at him. This man who had shared her bed for 7 years, and who now stood before her like a stranger offering charity to a homeless person on the street. She thought about the laptop waiting in her apartment, about the encrypted files and digital wallets that contained secrets Derek couldn't even imagine, and she almost smiled. "I'll consider your offer," she said quietly, standing to leave the courtroom with whatever dignity she had left. Derek's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty, but it was gone so quickly Maya wondered if she had imagined it. "Take care of yourself, Maya," he said, but his words carried the finality of someone closing a book he never planned to read again. As Maya walked out of the courthouse into the gray Portland afternoon, she pulled out her phone and sent a single text message to a number she had memorized but never used. 3 words that would change everything. "It is time." 3 days after Judge Patterson's preliminary ruling, Maya sat in the same uncomfortable courthouse hallway, but this time she wasn't alone. The text message she had sent had worked like a magic incantation, summoning help from a source Derek could never have anticipated. She checked her phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, watching for any sign of the person who was supposed to change everything about her impossible situation. Derek arrived with his usual entourage of expensive lawyers and supportive witnesses, his confidence even more pronounced after what he clearly viewed as a crushing victory in their previous court appearance. Morrison moved with the relaxed swagger of a general who had already won the war, carrying his perfectly organized files like trophies of conquest. The legal team had obviously prepared for what they expected to be a simple formality, the final signing of documents that would cement Maya's defeat and secure Derek's complete triumph. "Your Honor," Morrison began as Judge Patterson called the session to order, "we are here today to finalize the support arrangements and complete the necessary documentation for asset division. My client has prepared the final paperwork for Mrs. Rodriguez's signature, including her formal renunciation of any claims to Rodriguez Technologies and acceptance of the court's temporary support ruling." Judge Patterson nodded and looked toward Maya's empty chair at the defendant's table. "Where is Mrs. Rodriguez's counsel today?" she asked, her tone carrying the impatience of someone whose schedule was packed with similar cases. Just as Sarah Hendricks opened her mouth to explain her absence, the courtroom doors burst open with a sound like thunder. Every head turned to see a woman in her 50s stride into the room with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to being the most important person wherever she went. She was tall and elegant, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe chignon, and wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Derek's entire legal team combined. Her briefcase was Italian leather, her shoes were perfectly polished, and she moved with the fluid confidence of a predator who had never lost a fight. "Apologies for my tardiness, Your Honor," the woman said, her voice carrying a crisp authority that made everyone else in the room seem amateur by comparison. "I am Catherine Shun, partner at Shun, Morrison & Associates in Seattle. I will be representing Mrs. Rodriguez in these proceedings." The silence that followed was electric with tension. Morrison's face went pale as he recognized the name, while Derek's expression shifted from smug confidence to something approaching alarm. Catherine Shun was a legend in Pacific Northwest legal circles, known for taking cases that other lawyers considered impossible and winning them with surgical precision. Her hourly rate was rumored to exceed what most people made in a month, and she never took clients unless she was absolutely certain of victory. "Your Honor," Morrison said, his voice losing some of its earlier smoothness, "this is highly irregular. Mrs. Rodriguez has been represented by public counsel throughout these proceedings, and the sudden appearance of private representation raises questions about the source of funding for such expensive legal services." Catherine Shun smiled, and the expression was sharper than any blade Derek had ever seen. "Your Honor, my client's financial arrangements are her private business, as I'm sure the court would agree. I am here as duly authorized counsel, with all proper documentation of representation filed with the clerk's office this morning." She moved to the defendant's table with fluid grace, placing her expensive briefcase next to Maya's cheap folder like a luxury car parking next to a broken-down bicycle. Maya felt a strange sense of calm wash over her as this legal gladiator took her position, finally giving her the representation she deserved. Judge Patterson studied the new attorney with obvious interest. "Very well, counselor. What is your position regarding the pending motions?" Catherine Chun opened her briefcase with practiced precision, revealing files that were color-coded and tabbed with the same military organization that had impressed the court when Morrison presented his materials. "However, Your Honor," she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone about to reveal uncomfortable truths, "before we can proceed with any asset division or support determinations, I must request access to complete financial records for both parties covering the period from January 2019 through December 2024. Morrison immediately stood, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious alarm. "Your Honor, that request is overly broad and unnecessary. We have already provided all relevant financial documentation for the marriage period, and my client's post-divorce finances are not subject to discovery in spousal support proceedings." Catherine Chun turned toward Morrison with the patient expression of a teacher correcting a particularly slow student. "Actually, counselor, that is incorrect. Oregon family law requires full financial disclosure when one party claims inability to pay support or when there are questions about hidden assets. Given your client's vigorous assertions about his ex-wife's worthlessness and his own generous offer of $200 monthly, I believe complete transparency is not only appropriate, but legally mandated." Derek leaned over to whisper urgently in Morrison's ear, his face flushed with an emotion Maya had never seen from him before. It looked almost like fear, though she couldn't imagine what he had to be afraid of when he held all the cards in this legal game. "Your Honor," Catherine Chun continued, producing a thick folder from her briefcase, "I have specific concerns about cryptocurrency purchases, digital asset transactions, and technology investments that may have been concealed or misrepresented in previous financial disclosures. My client has reason to believe that significant assets were acquired during the marriage period using research and analysis that she provided, regardless of whose name appears on the accounts." The courtroom temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Morrison's face went from pale to gray, while Derek's confident posture crumpled like a deflated balloon. Marcus Chun, Derek's business partner, shifted uncomfortably in his seat and began studying his hands with sudden fascination. "Your Honor," Morrison said, his voice rising slightly in pitch, "this is a fishing expedition based on Mrs. Rodriguez's documented delusions about cryptocurrency expertise. My client has been completely transparent about his financial situation, and these vague allegations of hidden assets are simply desperate attempts to extend proceedings that should be concluded today." Catherine Chun smiled again, and this time her expression was positively predatory. "Your Honor, I have here preliminary blockchain analysis conducted by Digital Forensics International, one of the country's leading cryptocurrency investigation firms. Their initial findings suggest significant digital asset transactions originating from IP addresses registered to the Rodriguez household during the marriage period, with trading patterns consistent with sophisticated technical analysis rather than random speculation." She placed a bound report on the judge's bench, its official appearance contrasting sharply with everything else that had been presented in this case. The document was thick with charts, graphs, and technical data that looked nothing like the simple financial statements Morrison had been using to paint Maya as incompetent. Derek was now whispering frantically to Morrison, his gestures becoming more agitated by the minute. Maya watched her ex-husband's carefully constructed confidence crumble in real time, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself a small smile. Judge Patterson examined the preliminary report with growing interest. "Ms. Chun," she said, her tone indicating that she was taking these allegations much more seriously than Morrison would prefer, "what specific relief are you seeking on behalf of your client?" Catherine Chun stood with the grace of a dancer taking center stage. "Your Honor, we request an immediate injunction preventing the disposal or transfer of any assets by either party pending complete forensic analysis of all financial records from 2019 forward. We also request authorization for comprehensive blockchain analysis of all cryptocurrency transactions associated with either party, including analysis of trading strategies, timing, and the source of investment decisions that generated any profits during the marriage period. Morrison jumped to his feet with desperation clear in his voice. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. My client cannot be held responsible for whatever internet research his ex-wife conducted during their marriage. The fact that cryptocurrency transactions occurred from their shared household proves nothing about her involvement or expertise. My client was the sole income earner and the only person with actual investment authority." But Catherine Chun was ready for this objection. "Your Honor," she said, producing another document from her seemingly endless briefcase, "I have here sworn affidavits from 3 different cryptocurrency exchange platforms confirming that trading accounts were opened using Mrs. Rodriguez's personal information, social security number, and email addresses. Bank records show that funding for these accounts came from joint marital assets, but the research, analysis, and trading decisions were documented extensively in Mrs. Rodriguez's personal files." Derek's face had gone completely white now. Maya could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume that no longer fit properly, and his earlier swagger had evaporated entirely. Furthermore, Catherine Chun continued, her voice gaining momentum like an avalanche gathering speed. "Preliminary analysis suggests that cryptocurrency investments made during the marriage period have appreciated significantly in value. If, as the plaintiff claims, these investments were random speculation or worthless delusion, then their current value should reflect that assessment. However, if they were the result of sophisticated research and analysis provided by my client, then she may be entitled to significant compensation regardless of whose name appears on current account documentation." Judge Patterson set down the forensic report and studied both legal teams with renewed interest. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying a warning tone that made the veteran attorney visibly uncomfortable, "does your client have any objection to providing complete financial records for independent analysis?" Morrison looked like a man who had been asked to choose between drowning and burning. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "my client values his privacy and believes that his post-divorce financial affairs are not relevant to spousal support calculations. However, if the court orders disclosure, he will of course comply with all legal requirements." Derek was no longer whispering to his attorney. Instead, he sat rigid in his chair, staring at Maya with an expression she had never seen before. It was the look of someone who had suddenly realized that the game he thought he was winning had been rigged against him from the very beginning. Catherine Chun gathered her materials with the satisfied efficiency of someone who had accomplished exactly what she came to do. "Your Honor," she said, "we request an expedited hearing for full financial disclosure within 14 days. My client has waited long enough for justice in this matter, and the evidence suggests that delay will only allow for further concealment of marital assets that rightfully belong to her." Judge Patterson's gavel came down with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. "The court grants the request for expedited financial disclosure. All parties will provide complete records to the court-appointed forensic accountant within 10 business days. This court is adjourned." As the room began to empty, Maya remained seated beside Catherine Chun, watching Derek and his legal team huddle in what looked like a crisis management session. Morrison was speaking in urgent, clipped sentences while Derek's face grew progressively more pale. Marcus Chun had already slipped out of the courtroom, apparently unwilling to be associated with whatever was about to unfold. Maya finally turned to look at the woman who had just changed the entire trajectory of her life. Catherine Chun was packing her briefcase with the same methodical precision she had displayed throughout the hearing, her expression calm and satisfied. "How did you know?" Maya asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of Derek's increasingly frantic whispers to his attorney. Catherine Chun smiled, and for the first time, the expression looked genuinely warm rather than predatory. "Let's just say that certain people have been watching your situation with interest," she replied. "And when the time was right, they decided you deserved better representation than the court system was providing." Maya felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't facing Derek's legal machine alone. The small smile that had started during the hearing grew wider as she realized that her ex-husband's confident victory march had just turned into something much more complicated and dangerous. Derek's era of unchallenged dominance was about to end, and Maya intended to be there to watch every moment of his downfall. The expedited hearing 10 days later felt like stepping into a different universe from Maya's previous court experiences. The same courtroom that had witnessed Derek's confident legal dominance now buzzed with the tension of a high-stakes poker game where someone was about to reveal a winning hand that nobody else had seen coming. Judge Patterson entered with the bearing of someone who had spent the intervening days reviewing documentation that had fundamentally changed her understanding of the case before her. Derek sat at the plaintiff's table looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His usually perfect hair showed signs of stress, with several strands falling across his forehead in a way that suggested he had been running his hands through it compulsively. The expensive suit he wore couldn't disguise the tension in his shoulders or the way his leg bounced nervously under the table. Morrison had called in reinforcements, adding 2 additional attorneys to their team, but their presence seemed to indicate desperation rather than strength. At the defendant's table, Maya sat beside Catherine Shun with a composure that surprised even herself. The past 10 days had been a whirlwind of meetings, document reviews, and strategic planning sessions that had revealed the true scope of what her years of research had accomplished. For the first time since her marriage fell apart, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged, watching the chess game unfold from the perspective of someone who finally understood all the pieces on the board. "Your Honor," Catherine Shun began, rising with the fluid confidence of someone about to deliver a masterclass in legal warfare. "We are here today to present findings from the comprehensive financial analysis that this court ordered. I would like to call Dr. Elena Vasquez from Digital Forensics International as our expert witness." Dr. Vasquez entered the courtroom carrying a laptop and a thick folder of technical documentation. She was a woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing a simple black suit that suggested competence rather than fashion. Her credentials filled 2 pages, including a PhD in computer science from Stanford, 15 years of experience in cryptocurrency forensics, and testimony in over 200 federal cases involving digital asset analysis. "Dr. Vasquez," Catherine Shun continued, "please explain to the court what your analysis of the Rodriguez financial records has revealed." The expert witness opened her laptop and projected a complex timeline onto the courtroom screen, showing cryptocurrency transactions dating back to early 2019. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying the clear authority of someone who lived and breathed digital financial analysis. "Our forensic examination has revealed a sophisticated cryptocurrency investment operation that generated significant returns during the period from January 2019 through December 2024. Derek leaned forward in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. Morrison whispered urgently in his ear, but Derek seemed incapable of focusing on anything except the evidence materializing on the screen before him. "The initial investments," Dr. Vasquez continued, clicking through a series of detailed charts, began with the purchase of 847 Bitcoin in February 2019, when the price was approximately $3,400 per coin. This represents an initial investment of roughly $2.8 million, funded through transfers from joint bank accounts held by Derek and Maya Rodriguez. Judge Patterson studied the timeline with growing interest. "Dr. Vasquez," she asked, "what was the source of the investment decisions that led to these purchases?" The expert witness pulled up another screen showing detailed research documents and trading logs. "Your Honor, our analysis of the household computer systems shows extensive research files created and maintained by Maya Rodriguez. These files include technical analysis of Bitcoin price movements, fundamental analysis of blockchain adoption trends, detailed market timing predictions, and comprehensive investment strategies that directly correspond to the timing and amounts of all cryptocurrency purchases." Maya watched Derek's face cycle through a range of emotions as the evidence mounted against his carefully constructed narrative. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. Dr. Vasquez continued clicking through screens of evidence that painted a picture of sophisticated financial expertise that no one in the courtroom could ignore. The research files show that Mrs. Rodriguez correctly predicted major market movements with remarkable accuracy. Her analysis anticipated the 2020 Bitcoin rally by 14 months, the institutional adoption wave by 18 months, and the correlation between Federal Reserve monetary policy and cryptocurrency price movements by over 2 years. Morrison finally found his voice, standing with visible desperation. Your Honor, this proves nothing about Mrs. Rodriguez's actual involvement in investment decisions. The fact that research files exist on a shared computer doesn't demonstrate that she had authority over financial decisions or that my client was aware of her alleged activities. Catherine Chun smiled with the expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this objection. Dr. Vasquez, she said, what does your analysis show about the actual execution of these investment strategies? The expert witness pulled up trading logs that showed precise timestamps and decision-making patterns. Your Honor, the cryptocurrency exchange accounts were opened exclusively using Maya Rodriguez's personal information, social security number, and email addresses that were not shared with her husband. The trading patterns show systematic implementation of strategies that match exactly with the research recommendations found in her personal files. Derek was no longer whispering to his attorney. Instead, he sat in rigid silence, watching his meticulously crafted legal strategy disintegrate in real time. The man who had spent weeks painting Maya as a delusional fantasist now faced overwhelming evidence of her actual financial expertise. Furthermore, Dr. Vasquez continued, her presentation building momentum like an avalanche. The timing of investments shows sophisticated market analysis that goes far beyond random speculation. Mrs. Rodriguez's purchases were consistently made at market bottoms, with selling decisions that captured maximum profits during peak periods. This level of performance requires extensive knowledge and careful analysis of market conditions. Judge Patterson leaned back in her chair, studying the evidence with the expression of someone reassessing everything she thought she knew about the case. Dr. Vasquez, what is the current value of the cryptocurrency assets that originated from these investment decisions? The courtroom fell completely silent as Dr. Vasquez pulled up the final screen of her presentation. Your Honor, based on current market prices and accounting for all transactions through December 2024, the total value of cryptocurrency assets traceable to Maya Rodriguez's research and investment decisions is approximately $127 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence, stunning everyone into silence. Derek's face went completely white, and Morrison looked like he had been struck by lightning. Even Judge Patterson's composed judicial demeanor cracked slightly as she processed the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Maya felt a strange sense of calm wash over her as she watched the courtroom absorb the reality of her situation. For 7 years, Derek had dismissed her work as worthless delusion while secretly benefiting from investment decisions that had generated more wealth than most people could imagine in their wildest dreams. Morrison struggled to his feet, his earlier smooth confidence replaced by barely concealed desperation. Your Honor, he said, his voice cracking slightly, even if these allegations were true, which my client disputes, the cryptocurrency investments represent post-divorce activity that occurred after the dissolution of the marriage and therefore should not be subject to property division. Catherine Chun stood with predatory grace, clearly prepared for this desperate final argument. Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone delivering a killing blow, that assertion is completely false. Dr. Vasquez, please show the court the timeline of when these investment decisions were actually made. The expert witness pulled up a detailed chronological analysis showing research dates, recommendation documents, and actual purchase decisions. The investment strategy that generated these returns was researched, developed, and implemented entirely during the marriage period from 2019 through 2021. The current value represents appreciation of assets that were acquired using marital funds and Maya Rodriguez's intellectual property during the period when both parties had legal claims to joint investments. Derek was now staring at Maya with an expression of complete bewilderment, as if seeing her for the first time. The woman he had dismissed as a worthless parasite had been quietly building a financial empire that dwarfed his technology startup by orders of magnitude. Dr. Vasquez continued her methodical destruction of Derek's position. The evidence shows that Mr. Rodriguez was aware of these investments because bank records indicate his electronic approval of the initial fund transfers. However, the research, analysis, timing, and strategic decisions were documented exclusively in Maya Rodriguez's personal files and executed through accounts that were established with her credentials and controlled through her access. Judge Patterson studied the evidence for several long minutes before addressing the courtroom. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying a warning tone that made the veteran attorney visibly uncomfortable, "does your client wish to present any evidence disputing these findings?" Morrison looked like a man drowning in a sea of his own legal strategies. "Your Honor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "my client requests time to review these allegations and prepare an appropriate response. The complexity of these claims requires careful analysis before we can provide adequate rebuttal." Catherine Shen gathered her materials with the satisfied efficiency of someone who had just won the lottery. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who held all the cards in this legal poker game. "Given the magnitude of assets involved and the clear documentation of my client's intellectual property contributions, we request immediate injunctive relief preventing any transfer or disposal of cryptocurrency assets pending final property division proceedings." Judge Patterson's gavel came down with a sound that echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. The court grants the request for asset protection and orders a complete forensic audit of all cryptocurrency holdings traceable to the marriage period. Mr. Rodriguez is enjoined from disposing of any digital assets pending final resolution of property claims. As the courtroom began to empty, Maya remained seated beside Catherine Shen, watching Derek and his legal team struggle to process what had just happened. The man who had offered her $200 a month in spousal support now faced the possibility of losing control of assets worth more than most Fortune 500 companies. Derek finally looked directly at Maya, his expression a mixture of shock, fear, and something that might have been grudging respect. The woman he thought he knew had vanished completely, replaced by someone whose capabilities exceeded his ability to comprehend or control. Maya met his gaze with steady confidence, her voice calm and clear as she spoke for the first time in hours. "The research was always real, Derek. You just never bothered to understand what you were looking at." For the first time in their 7-year relationship, Derek had absolutely nothing to say in response. The man who had built his identity around intellectual superiority and financial success now sat speechless before evidence of his ex-wife's expertise that made his own accomplishments look trivial by comparison. Maya stood to leave the courtroom, walking past Derek's table with the quiet dignity of someone who had finally been vindicated after years of being dismissed and underestimated. Behind her, she could hear frantic, whispered conversations between Derek and his attorneys, but their words no longer had any power to hurt her. The game had fundamentally changed, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Maya was the one holding all the winning cards. The final hearing 3 weeks later brought with it an atmosphere of inevitability that everyone in the courtroom could feel. Judge Patterson had clearly spent considerable time reviewing the mountain of evidence that had emerged from the forensic analysis, and her demeanor suggested someone who had reached conclusions that would fundamentally reshape the lives of everyone involved. The gallery was packed with reporters who had gotten wind of what was shaping up to be one of the most dramatic financial reversals in Oregon family court history. Derek sat at the plaintiff's table looking like a man who had aged 10 years in the past month. His expensive suits could no longer disguise the weight loss and stress lines that had appeared since Dr. Vasquez's devastating testimony. Morrison had brought an even larger legal team this time, but their body language suggested lawyers preparing for a catastrophic defeat rather than confident advocates fighting for their clients' interests. Maya entered the courtroom with Catherine Shen, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She wore a simple but elegant navy dress that she had purchased with money from her first cryptocurrency sale in over 2 years, a small symbolic gesture that represented her emerging independence from the poverty Derek had tried to impose on her. "Your Honor," Catherine Shen began as the session opened, "we are here today to present conclusive evidence regarding the ownership and control of cryptocurrency assets valued at approximately $120 million. I would like to call blockchain security expert Dr. Michael Chong to provide technical verification of wallet ownership and transaction histories. Dr. Chong approached the witness stand carrying a tablet loaded with forensic software that could trace cryptocurrency transactions with surgical precision. He was a slight man in his 30s with the intense focus of someone who lived in the digital realm, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a conservative gray suit that made him look more like an accountant than a revolutionary financial detective. Dr. Chong, Catherine Chun continued, please explain to the court how cryptocurrency ownership can be definitively established through blockchain analysis. Your Honor, Dr. Chong began, his voice carrying the precise authority of someone who dealt in mathematical certainties rather than legal ambiguities. Cryptocurrency ownership is determined by control of private cryptographic keys that correspond to specific wallet addresses on various blockchain networks. Unlike traditional financial accounts, blockchain records provide an immutable and publicly verifiable history of all transactions. He activated his tablet and projected a complex network diagram showing wallet addresses and transaction flows that looked like a digital family tree. The analysis we have conducted shows 47 distinct cryptocurrency wallet addresses that were created, funded, and controlled exclusively by Maya Rodriguez. These wallets contain Bitcoin, Ethereum, and various other digital assets with a combined current value of $120.7 million. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the evidence mounted against any possible claim to shared ownership. Morrison whispered urgently in his ear, but Derek seemed incapable of focusing on legal strategy when faced with the magnitude of what Maya had accomplished without his knowledge or involvement. Dr. Chong continued his methodical presentation, clicking through screens that showed years of sophisticated investment activity. The private keys for these wallets are secured using encryption methods that Mrs. Rodriguez developed herself, based on cryptographic research that she documented extensively in her personal files. The security protocols are sophisticated enough that even with unlimited computing resources, unauthorized access would be mathematically impossible. Judge Patterson studied the technical evidence with the expression of someone trying to grasp concepts that existed at the bleeding edge of financial innovation. Dr. Chong, she asked, is there any evidence that Mr. Rodriguez had knowledge of or access to these cryptocurrency holdings? The expert witness pulled up detailed logs showing access patterns and security protocols. Your Honor, the blockchain evidence shows that all wallet creation, transaction initiation, and security management was performed from a single computer workstation that was password protected and encrypted using methods that Mr. Rodriguez demonstrably did not understand. Additionally, the timing of transactions consistently occurred during periods when Mr. Rodriguez was documented to be at his office or traveling for business. Maya watched Derek's face as the evidence systematically destroyed every possible avenue for claiming joint ownership of her cryptocurrency empire. The man who had spent their marriage dismissing her technical knowledge now faced irrefutable proof that her expertise exceeded his understanding by orders of magnitude. Catherine Chun approached the witness with the confidence of someone delivering a coup de grace. Dr. Chong, what does the blockchain evidence show about the research and analysis that guided these investment decisions? The expert witness displayed a timeline that correlated Maya's research files with actual cryptocurrency purchases, creating a pattern that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The investment decisions show consistent implementation of strategies that were documented in Mrs. Rodriguez's personal research files weeks or months before actual transactions occurred. The correlation between her written analysis and subsequent market performance is so precise that it represents clear evidence of expert-level cryptocurrency knowledge and market timing abilities. Derek was no longer able to maintain even the pretense of composure. His leg bounced frantically under the table, and he kept glancing toward the courtroom exit as if calculating whether he could simply flee from the consequences of his own arrogance and dismissive treatment of Maya's abilities. Dr. Chong pulled up a final screen showing current wallet balances and asset distribution. The $120.7 million valuation represents holdings across multiple cryptocurrency platforms, with the largest concentration in Bitcoin that was purchased during the 2019 and 2020 market bottoms. The timing of these purchases required sophisticated technical analysis and market understanding that very few professional investors possessed at that time. Morrison finally found the courage to cross-examine the expert witness, though his questions sounded more like desperate attempts to find any flaw in an airtight case. "Dr. Chong," he said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence, "isn't it possible that Mrs. Rodriguez received guidance or advice from professional cryptocurrency advisors during this period?" The expert witness smiled with the patience of someone who had anticipated exactly this line of questioning. "The blockchain evidence shows that Mrs. Rodriguez was providing analysis and recommendations to several professional investment firms during this period, not receiving advice from them. Her research files include correspondence where she was consulting with institutional investors about cryptocurrency market trends, establishing her as an expert advisor rather than a novice seeking guidance." Derek's face went completely gray as he processed the implications of this revelation. Not only had Maya been managing a fortune that dwarfed his technology company, but she had been recognized as a professional expert by institutional investors, while he was dismissing her work as worthless fantasy. Catherine Shin stood for redirect examination with the expression of someone about to deliver a final devastating blow. "Dr. Chong," she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of complete victory, "what is your professional opinion regarding Maya Rodriguez's level of cryptocurrency expertise based on the blockchain evidence and investment performance you have analyzed?" The expert witness looked directly at Derek as he delivered his assessment. "Based on the sophistication of her security protocols, the accuracy of her market timing, and the consistent performance of her investment strategies over a 6-year period, Maya Rodriguez demonstrates expert-level knowledge that exceeds the capabilities of most professional cryptocurrency fund managers. Her investment returns place her in the top 1% of cryptocurrency investors globally during this time period." Judge Patterson reviewed her notes for several long minutes before addressing the courtroom. "The evidence presented today establishes clear and convincing proof that Maya Rodriguez developed, funded, and controlled cryptocurrency investments totaling approximately $120 million through her own research, analysis, and technical expertise during the marriage period." Derek looked like he was going to be physically sick. The woman he had offered $200 a month in spousal support controlled a fortune that made his entire technology startup look like a lemonade stand by comparison. Furthermore, Judge Patterson continued, her voice carrying the weight of legal precedent being established, "The blockchain evidence demonstrates that Mrs. Rodriguez's intellectual property and technical expertise were the sole source of investment decisions that generated these returns. Mr. Rodriguez has presented no evidence of contribution to or knowledge of these investment activities." Morrison made one final desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his client's position. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking with desperation, "even if Mrs. Rodriguez controlled these assets, they were acquired using marital funds and therefore should be subject to equitable distribution regardless of who made the actual investment decisions." Catherine Shun rose to respond with the predatory grace of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just checkmated their opponent. "Oregon law clearly establishes that when one spouse uses marital assets to create separate property through their own labor and expertise, the resulting appreciation belongs exclusively to the creating spouse. Mrs. Rodriguez used her intellectual property and technical skills to transform joint bank funds into separate cryptocurrency assets through her own analysis and decision-making." Judge Patterson nodded with the expression of someone who had reached a conclusion that was both legally sound and personally satisfying. "The court finds that Maya Rodriguez is the sole owner of all cryptocurrency assets that resulted from her investment activities during the marriage period. Mr. Rodriguez has no legal claim to these digital assets." Vanessa, who had been sitting in the gallery throughout the proceedings, quietly gathered her designer purse and slipped toward the courtroom exit with the furtive movements of someone abandoning a sinking ship. Maya noticed her departure with mild amusement, wondering how long Derek's new relationship would survive the revelation that his ex-wife was one of the wealthiest women in Oregon. Derek sat in stunned silence as Judge Patterson continued delivering her ruling, systematically dismantling every argument his legal team had presented over the past months. The man who had built his identity around financial success and intellectual superiority now faced the devastating reality that his dismissed ex-wife had achieved wealth beyond his wildest dreams, while he was congratulating himself on offering her poverty-level support payments. The court hereby orders that all cryptocurrency assets under dispute be released immediately to Maya Rodriguez's control, Judge Patterson announced, her gavel coming down with the finality of complete legal victory. Additionally, Mr. Rodriguez will pay all court costs and expert witness fees associated with these proceedings. Maya stood beside Catherine Chun as the courtroom erupted in a buzz of conversation and rapidly scribbled notes from the reporters who had witnessed financial legal history being made. For the first time since her marriage ended, she felt like the person she had always known herself to be: brilliant, capable, and deserving of respect rather than condescension. Derek remained seated at the plaintiff's table, staring at the floor with the hollow expression of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed around him. The woman he thought he had crushed and discarded had emerged from their legal battle as one of the most successful cryptocurrency investors in the country, while his own achievements suddenly seemed trivial and meaningless by comparison. Maya walked past Derek's table on her way out of the courtroom, pausing just long enough to deliver the words she had been saving for this moment. The research was never worthless, Derek. You just never bothered to understand what I was actually accomplishing while you were busy feeling superior. Derek looked up at her with an expression of complete bewilderment, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in their entire relationship. The woman standing before him bore no resemblance to the defeated victim he had expected to crush in family court. Instead, she radiated the quiet confidence of someone who had always known her own worth and had finally proven it to the world. Maya left the courthouse that day as one of the wealthiest women in the Pacific Northwest, her vindication complete and her future entirely under her own control. The final sentencing hearing 2 weeks later brought with it an atmosphere of complete role reversal that would have been unimaginable when this legal saga began. Judge Patterson entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who was about to deliver justice that had been long overdue, her expression carrying the satisfaction of a jurist who had witnessed truth emerge from beneath layers of deception and arrogance. Derek sat at what was no longer the plaintiff's table, since Maya had filed countersuits that made her the legal aggressor in their ongoing battle. He looked like a broken man, his expensive suits replaced by off-the-rack clothing that reflected his rapidly deteriorating financial situation. Morrison had withdrawn from the case after Derek could no longer afford the firm's retainer fees, leaving him with a court-appointed attorney who looked almost as defeated as his client. Maya took her place beside Catherine Chun with the quiet confidence of someone who had already won every battle that mattered. She wore a tailored charcoal gray suit that had cost more than Derek's monthly expenses and carried herself with the poise of someone who had discovered her true power and intended to use it wisely. "Your Honor," Catherine Chun began, rising with the fluid grace of someone delivering final justice after a long campaign. "We are here today for sentencing regarding Mr. Rodriguez's attempted concealment of marital assets and his systematic campaign to defraud my client of her rightful property. The evidence has established beyond any doubt that Mr. Rodriguez knowingly attempted to hide cryptocurrency assets worth over $120 million while offering his ex-wife poverty-level support payments." Judge Patterson reviewed the thick file of evidence that had accumulated over months of legal warfare. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority backed by irrefutable facts, "the court has determined that your actions constitute deliberate fraud and asset concealment on a massive scale. Your attempts to portray Mrs. Rodriguez as incompetent and worthless while simultaneously benefiting from her financial expertise represent calculated deception that this court will not tolerate." Derek's court-appointed attorney attempted to stand for what would obviously be a futile mitigation argument, but Judge Patterson continued with the momentum of someone who had reached conclusions that would reshape both parties' futures permanently. "Furthermore, the court has discovered additional evidence that compounds the severity of your misconduct." Catherine Chun pulled out another folder of documentation that made Derek visibly flinch as he recognized what was about to be revealed. "Your Honor, Our investigation has uncovered that Rodriguez Technologies, Mr. Rodriguez's supposedly self-built technology company, was initially funded through cryptocurrency profits generated by my client's investment strategies in early 2020. The courtroom fell silent as this final piece of Derek's deception was exposed to daylight. Maya watched her ex-husband's face cycle through disbelief, terror, and resignation as he realized that even his proudest professional accomplishment was built on foundations that belonged to the woman he had tried to destroy. Dr. Chong, recalled as an expert witness, projected financial records that showed the money trail from Maya's cryptocurrency sales to Derek's business bank accounts. The evidence shows that $3.2 million in startup funding for Rodriguez Technologies came directly from cryptocurrency sales executed by Maya Rodriguez in February and March of 2020. Mr. Rodriguez used his wife's investment profits to fund his technology company while simultaneously claiming that her cryptocurrency activities were worthless delusions. Derek was now staring at the table in front of him, unable or unwilling to meet anyone's gaze as the full scope of his hypocrisy was laid bare for everyone to see. The man who had built his identity around entrepreneurial success and financial acumen had actually been living off his wife's investment genius while convincing himself and everyone else that he was the sole source of their household's prosperity. Judge Patterson studied the evidence with the expression of someone who had seen many forms of deception, but rarely anything this systematically calculated and cruel. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice carrying a tone of disgust that made everyone in the courtroom uncomfortable. "You have spent months in this court portraying yourself as a successful entrepreneur supporting a worthless dependent. The evidence shows that you are actually a fraud who built his business using his wife's money, while psychologically abusing her with claims that her work had no value." Catherine Chin approached the bench with a document that would deliver the final crushing blow to Derek's remaining dignity. "Your Honor, based on the calculated nature of Mr. Rodriguez's deception and the massive scale of assets he attempted to conceal, we request that the court impose the maximum penalty allowed under Oregon law for asset concealment during divorce proceedings." The penalty calculation that Dr. Chong presented to the court was devastating in its mathematical precision. Mr. Rodriguez attempted to conceal assets worth $120.7 million while offering spousal support of $200 per month. Oregon law allows penalties of up to 50% of concealed assets plus punitive damages for fraud. We request that the court order Mr. Rodriguez to pay $2.1 million in penalties to my client, representing the minimum statutory requirement for his systematic deception. Derek's head snapped up as he processed the magnitude of what he owed the woman he had tried to humiliate and impoverish. His face went completely white as he realized that the penalty alone exceeded the total value of everything he owned, including his technology company and all his personal assets. Moreover, Judge Patterson continued, the court orders the immediate dissolution of any claims Mr. Rodriguez may have to Rodriguez Technologies, since the company was built using Mrs. Rodriguez's undisclosed investment capital. The business assets will be transferred to Mrs. Rodriguez as partial compensation for her fraudulently concealed contributions to marital property. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. "Your Honor, I don't have $2.1 million. My company is worth maybe $800,000, and that's optimistic. This penalty will destroy me financially." Judge Patterson's expression showed no sympathy for Derek's sudden understanding of what financial devastation felt like. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice carrying the cold satisfaction of perfect justice, "you should have considered these consequences before attempting to defraud your wife of her rightful property. The court will arrange for asset seizure and liquidation to satisfy this judgment." Within hours of the sentencing, Derek's financial empire began collapsing like a house of cards. His Tesla was repossessed by court order, his bank accounts were frozen pending asset distribution, and his technology company's offices were sealed while forensic accountants prepared for complete liquidation. The luxury lifestyle that he had flaunted during their divorce proceedings evaporated in a single day, leaving him with nothing but the growing realization of how completely he had underestimated the woman he thought he had defeated. Maya's transformation was equally dramatic but infinitely more satisfying. Catherine Chen's firm, now retained permanently with cryptocurrency payments that exceeded most lawyers' annual incomes, filed incorporation papers for Rodriguez Digital Investments, establishing Maya as the CEO of her own cryptocurrency management company. The woman who had been offered poverty-level support payments was now positioned to become one of the most influential financial advisors on the West Coast. The media coverage of Derek's downfall became a sensation that extended far beyond Oregon's family court system. Portland Business Journal ran a front-page story titled "Crypto Queen Destroys Arrogant Ex-Husband, an Epic Legal Reversal" that detailed how Maya's expertise had generated more wealth than most Fortune 500 companies, while Derek convinced himself he was supporting a worthless dependent. The article included before and after photos that showed Derek's transformation from confident entrepreneur to financially ruined defendant, alongside Maya's evolution from poverty-stricken divorcee to multi-millionaire investment expert. Tech blogs picked up the story with headlines like "Startup Founder Discovers Wife Actually Built His Success" that detailed how Derek's supposedly self-made company had been funded entirely by Maya's cryptocurrency profits. The irony of his situation became a cautionary tale shared across social media platforms by thousands of people who had experienced similar dismissal of their capabilities by arrogant partners or employers. Derek's social circle abandoned him with the swift efficiency of people who had only tolerated his company because of his perceived success and wealth. Marcus Chun terminated their business partnership via email, citing concerns about Derek's judgment and dishonesty that made continued association impossible. Jennifer Walsh blocked his phone number after he made desperate attempts to borrow money for basic living expenses. David Thornton, his former college roommate who had testified about Derek's superior business acumen, refused to return his calls once news of the financial reversal became public knowledge. Vanessa had disappeared entirely from Derek's life within 48 hours of Judge Patterson's final ruling, leaving behind only a brief text message that informed him she was pursuing opportunities with someone who actually possessed the wealth and success she thought she had been dating. Her social media accounts, which had featured countless photos of expensive dinners and luxury shopping trips funded by Derek's credit cards, were scrubbed clean of any evidence that she had ever known him. Meanwhile, Maya's new life began taking shape with the systematic precision that had characterized her cryptocurrency investments. She purchased a penthouse apartment in Portland's Pearl District with panoramic views of the city skyline and the Cascade Mountains beyond. The space was designed with clean lines and modern technology that reflected her appreciation for innovation and efficiency, featuring a dedicated office where she could manage her growing cryptocurrency portfolio and advise institutional clients who were eager to benefit from her demonstrated expertise. Maya's daily routine now included meetings with venture capital firms seeking her guidance on blockchain technology investments, consultations with pension funds interested in cryptocurrency diversification strategies, and speaking engagements at financial conferences where she shared insights about digital asset management with audiences of professional investors. The woman who had been dismissed as unemployable was now commanding consulting fees that exceeded Derek's former annual income for single-day engagements. 6 months after Judge Patterson's final ruling, Derek was living in his childhood bedroom in his parents' suburban ranch house, having lost his apartment when he could no longer afford rent after liquidating all his assets to partially satisfy the court judgment. His technology skills, which had once seemed impressive, proved inadequate for finding employment that could support even a modest lifestyle, let alone generate the income needed to pay off his massive debt to Maya. His job search was complicated by news coverage that had made his name synonymous with arrogance, fraud, and catastrophic misjudgment. Potential employers who Googled his name found dozens of articles detailing how he had built his career on his ex-wife's undisclosed financial genius, while publicly humiliating her as incompetent and worthless. The story had become required reading in business schools as an example of how ego and prejudice could blind successful people to obvious truths that destroyed them completely. Derek's desperation finally drove him to attempt what would become the final humiliation in their relationship. On a rainy Thursday evening in November, he called Maya's new office number with a request that represented the complete inversion of their former power dynamic. "Maya," he said, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who had lost everything that once defined his identity. "I know you have every reason to hate me, and I don't blame you for what happened in court. But I'm desperate, and you're the only person I know who might be able to help me get back on my feet." Maya listened to his rambling explanation of his financial situation with the detached interest of someone observing a scientific experiment in human behavior. Derek explained that he owed money to creditors, couldn't afford basic living expenses, and desperately needed a loan to restart his life and career. His voice cracked as he offered to pay whatever interest rate she considered fair, promising that he had learned from his mistakes and would never again underestimate her capabilities or intelligence. The silence that followed Derek's plea stretched for nearly a minute as Maya considered her response to the man who had once offered her $200 a month while controlling millions of dollars that rightfully belonged to her. "Derek," she finally said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had learned to value herself appropriately, "I appreciate your honesty about our history, and I don't wish poverty or suffering on anyone, including you. However, I've learned to be very careful about who I trust with my resources, and your track record of financial decision-making speaks for itself." She paused, allowing the weight of her refusal to settle over Derek's desperate hopes before delivering her final verdict on their relationship. "I suggest you explore traditional lending options through banks or credit unions that specialize in helping people rebuild after financial difficulties. I'm sure someone with your entrepreneurial background will find a way to create value and earn the success you're looking for." The call ended with Derek sitting alone in his childhood bedroom, staring at his phone and finally understanding the magnitude of what he had lost through his arrogance and cruelty. The woman who could have saved him from financial ruin with a gesture that wouldn't even register in her massive cryptocurrency portfolio had chosen to let him face the consequences of his own actions without intervention or assistance. Maya returned to reviewing investment proposals from pension funds seeking her expertise in cryptocurrency portfolio management, her decision to refuse Derek's request requiring exactly as much emotional energy as declining a telemarketing call from a stranger. The man who had once controlled every aspect of her financial life was now irrelevant to her success and unworthy of her attention or resources. Derek Rodriguez had learned, far too late, that the woman he thought he understood was actually brilliant enough to accumulate wealth beyond his comprehension, while he convinced himself he was superior to her in every meaningful way. His punishment was not just financial ruin, but the knowledge that his arrogance had cost him everything while Maya achieved the success and recognition she had always deserved. What did you think about this incredible transformation? Have you ever witnessed someone completely underestimate another person's abilities, only to have that misjudgment come back to destroy them? Maya's story shows that sometimes the quiet ones are building empires while everyone else is talking. Share your thoughts in the comments about the most dramatic reversal of fortune you've ever seen or experienced personally.